The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to rise today to speak on behalf of my motion, Motion 47, which would instruct the Standing Committee on Health to examine the public health effects and the ease of access and viewing of online violent and degrading sexually explicit material on children, women, and men. I believe that this is an important issue and it's long overdue for consideration by this House, and it is my hope that M-47 will lead to better protection for youth online, foster healthy sexual development of youth, and combat violence against women and girls. Now, I want to say at the beginning of this debate that as a first-term MP, the impact of violent and sexually explicit material was not an issue that I expected to bring forward when arriving here a year ago, nor was it on my radar. However, there are a number of organizations that came to me from across my riding and across Canada that asked me to bring this matter forward. As I started to examine the research and the information about the impact of violent and degrading sexually explicit material, I was shocked by what I found. Now, some members may be wondering why I don't use the term pornography in the motion. When most people think of the term pornography, they think of nude pictures Playboy started publishing about throughout the 1960s and onward. But today's pornography is much different. In fact, it is telling that only a year ago, Playboy announced that it would stop publishing nude pictures in its magazines because it wasn't profitable anymore. The market has shifted to much more explicit material, and the vast majority of the features violence and degradation. Mr. Speaker, I want to share a few statistics about sexually explicit material and the industry behind it. In Canada, the average age of first exposure to sexually explicit material for boys is 12 years old. Sexually explicit websites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined, with Pornhub, the largest free site, alone receiving over 21 billion visits in 2015. 35% of all internet downloads are sexually explicit. Globally, the sexually explicit material is a $97 billion industry. Almost 90% of mainstream sexually explicit content features violence against women. Sexually explicit material has become the primary source of information about sex and has a significant factor on influencing sexual behaviors of children and adolescents. Let that sink in for a moment. A $97 billion industry that makes up 35% of all internet downloads and is easily accessible by the click of a button primarily features violence and degradation of women and is the primary sexual educator of our youth starting from the age of 12. As a result, boys and girls are taught that violent and degrading sexual behavior is acceptable and expected. This has an impact on the physical, mental, and emotional health of many young Canadians who will grow up to be fathers, mothers, doctors, teachers, legislators. Madam Speaker, as I researched more about this issue, it brought me back to the time shortly after my daughter was born and the heartbreaking story of Rotea Parsons. The situation I'm sure all here today remember. At that time, I remember asking myself, what gave these boys the idea that it was okay to objectify and assault a heavily intoxicated young woman? And what gave them the idea that sharing the pictures of this event online was normal? It was a story that moved me deeply, and at the time, seeing the impact that this had on her, which ultimately led to her suicide, it wasn't until researching this issue that I began to make the connection between violent sexually explicit material online and the way that it is educating a generation of young people. When I reached out to her mother, Leah Parsons, she expressed her concern over the impact of sexually explicit material and was one of the first to extend her support for M-47. She writes, "Easy access to messages and visuals online condones violent pornographic templates for our youth and is setting the stage for what is considered the norm when it comes to the treating of females. If my daughter was treated as a human being and not as an object to conquer, she would still be here today. Societal messages directly influence rape and violence towards women." Madam Speaker, 40 years of academic research has revealed that exposure to sexually explicit material, and especially material featuring violence, is harmful to the physical and mental health of individuals, especially adolescents. Madam Speaker, for example, in 2016, a study of over 4,500 European teenagers aged 14 to 17 published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found that boys' perpetration of sexual coercion and abuse was significantly associated with regular viewing of online pornography. And a 2012 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity of over 70 academic studies highlighted that consistent findings have emerged linking adolescent use of pornography that depicts violence with increased degrees of sexually aggressive behavior. A Columbia University neurologist, Dr. Norman Deutsch, in his book, The Brain That Changes Itself, describes how sexually explicit material actually causes rewiring of neural circuits. He writes, "Sexual tastes are molded by an individual's experience and their culture. These tastes are acquired and then wired into the brain. We are unable to distinguish our second nature from our original nature, because our neuroplastic brains, once rewired, develop new nature every bit as biological as our original." The part of the brain he is referring to is the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that helps us make good and rational decisions. And there's much more significant impact on youth because this part of the brain has not fully developed until the age of 25. Madam Speaker, I would continue to cite study after study that reveals the impact of violent and degrading sexually explicit material on youth, but I would quickly run out of time. Instead, I want to highlight another important aspect of this issue, which is protecting youth online. Children and adolescents' exposure to violent sexually explicit material is a form of child abuse. As I mentioned earlier, the average age of first exposure is 12 years old, meaning half of youth are exposed before 12. Yet we take a hands-off approach, and instead of recognizing the exposure is child abuse. The renowned Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Center put it this way: "The impact of exposure to pornography, sexual exploitation, and the overall sexualization of children results in a traumatic and detrimental outcome for the child. It is our view that is society's collective responsibility to protect children outweighs concerns about censorship. Any exposure to adult or child pornographic images is abuse, and children are detrimentally harmed and further victimized by these actions." The Canadian Centre for Child Protection lists a number of ways that exposure to sexually explicit material can harm children, including increasing a child's risk of victimization, increasing a child's health risks, interfering with a child's healthy sexual development, and increasing a child's risk of problematic sexual behavior against other children in an effort to experiment. I want to note that this last point is also confirmed by the Public Health Agency of Canada, which lists exposure to sexually explicit material as a contributing factor to sibling-on-sibling abuse. Madam Speaker, I have spoken much about the impact of viewing violent and degrading sexually explicit material, and now I want to take a moment to highlight how easily accessible it is. A new Canadian documentary on sexually explicit material that I did a screening of for a few weeks ago showed how simple it was for a 9-year-old to access violent online sexual material by using rather innocent search terms. In fact, pornography companies specifically label this material to make it easier to find or be exposed to. Another important factor of the accessibility is its cost. The majority of sexually explicit material is free. No credit card is needed, no verification is required, no child safety measures are in place. In fact, part of the reason this material is so accessible and unregulated is Parliament has not looked at the impact of sexually explicit material since 1985, before the invention of the Internet. The 1985 Fraser Committee report found that the pre-Internet 1985 sexually explicit material had already perpetrated lies about the aspects of women's humanity and denies the validity of their aspirations to be treated as full and equal citizens. Now, some might be wondering, if violent sexual content is so harmful, why aren't we seeing it in society? Madam Speaker, we are seeing it. Consider that as many as 1 in 6 girls and 1 in 12 boys are currently experiencing sexual abuse. And Dr. Peter Silverstone, co-author of the new study out of the University of Alberta, says, "When all types of sexual abuse are combined, including exposure to pornography or other sexual material, the number of children sexually abused is as high as 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys." Madam Speaker, that's staggering. And it's shameful that we have done nothing about this for over 30 years. I believe that this issue cuts across political lines. The Prime Minister has stated there's issues around pornography and its prevalence now, and its accessibility, which is something that I'm really wrapping my head around as a father of kids who are approaching their teenage years. Ms. Sophie Gregoire Trudeau has also raised this concern by saying, "The objectification of the female body, the normalization of pornography, and the rape language and culture is destroying the self-esteem of our girls and is an insult to the spirit of our boys." I particularly appreciate her concern about how this issue affects both boys and girls. I would also note that the former NDP MP, Judy Washa-Lisalis, and a Conservative MP, Joy Smith, have similarly highlighted that this is one of the top concerns for families across our nation. I am also grateful that M-47 has been jointly seconded by MPs from all 5 political parties in this Parliament, and that is not a common experience, and I want to extend my sincere thanks to each of these MPs who have officially extended their support. I would also like to thank the member from Mount Royal for his discussions and insights. He is concerned about civil liberty infringement. To him, I would make the analogy between the internet and our road system. In Canada, we have the freedom of movement. We have an extensive road system that is available to all Canadians. We may walk and ride a bike on the road anywhere in Canada, really without restriction. However, if you wish to use the roads for particular things, such as driving or transporting large items, you need a license or a permit. And there are also other things that are prohibited when it comes to road use. Speeding, racing are a couple examples. The internet is public domain, and we all need to be responsible with its use. If we could solve the issues of online sexual violence without passing a single new law, I would be overjoyed. My motion does not put forward any policy directives. We need to work together to end sexual violence everywhere. A good place to start is in the understanding what drives societal mindsets. Civil liberties are immensely important to me. I know that the member from Mount Royal and I have a desire to defend civil liberties, and we have this in common. I would also know that from his time as mayor of Côte-Saint-Luc, he and his council were viewed as one of the most innovative councils in Quebec. And so I reach out to the member from Mount Royal and his entire caucus to say, work with us to ensure that civil liberties are maintained and that safety on the internet is a reality. Lastly, and certainly not least, this motion has garnered a strong movement of support from coast to coast to coast across a diverse array of over 40 organizations. From the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee in BC to the Newfoundland and Labrador Feminists and Allies to the Puktutut Inuit Women of Canada, this is an issue that many care about deeply. I'm grateful for the support of Crossroads Resource Centre and Women's Shelter, as well as the Caribou Child and Youth Centre that serve women and youth in my riding in Northern Alberta. Honourable colleagues, as parents and policymakers, we have a shared responsibility to see that young boys and girls grow up to develop positive attitudes on sexuality which foster dignity instead of objectification and affection instead of coercion. That is a Canada we all seek, and I hope that I have your support for M-47. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.